welcome to Rock and Roll Confessional.
Well, thank you, CWS. How are you today?
Good. I'm great. It's almost Thanksgiving here in the United States. For those of you that are listening in other areas, probably don't have Thanksgiving. You can be thankful, though, for anything you want to feel thankful for.
It's probably my favorite holiday, I think.
Is it? Because you get to eat all that turkey?
No, I just think because there's no real, Christmas is so commercialized with, giving presents and all that kind of stuff. And it's just nice to have a holiday where you make people think, or at least try to get them to think and be thankful for, the blessings that they have.
Yeah. It's a good time to reflect on things that we are thankful for.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, well, we got a pretty good show today. We talked with a couple of Van Halen fans that were able to get very close to Eddie and write this book. Brad Tolinski, he was the editor-in-chief of Guitar World magazine for over 25 years. And Chris Gill was the editor-in-chief of Guitar Aficionado magazine. The two of them have joined forces to put out the new book, Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah, they've combined a total of over 50 hours of unreleased interviews that they had with Eddie and that are now being shared in this great book. It is a major biography by two music journalists who knew him the best. The heart of Eruption is drawn from these intimate and wide-ranging talks, and as well as conversations with family, friends, colleagues, including other major guitarists like Tony Iommi, Steve Vai, Steve Lukather, and bassist Michael Anthony.
So let's talk with the writers, Brad Tolinski and Chris Gill, as we discuss their new book, Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen. Good day, gentlemen.
Hello, Brad. Hello, Chris.
Here we are. I listened to your radio show many times when I lived in LA.
You're from originally Fallbrook or somewhere around there?
Yeah, I grew up in Fallbrook, and but lived in Los Angeles a lot on and off over the years.
Excellent. And where are you now?
New Jersey.
How about you, Brad? From Detroit originally, right?
I'm from Detroit originally. I'm in Massachusetts now, Cape Cod area.
Oh my God, that's just
hiding out.
That sounds great. So these gentlemen, yes, we have Brad Tolinski and Chris Gill. I've written this book called Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen. Brad, you were editor-in-chief of Guitar World magazine, and Chris, you were the editor-in-chief of Guitar Aficionado magazine.
Correct.
True.
You guys, just reading this book, Eddie was not an easy person to get to know. He was extremely shy, but you go into how he was as a person. You even went there later in the book. I didn't think you would do that, but you went there, and we'll get to there later. But you guys spoke the same language, and that was guitar.
Yeah. It's interesting to me when I read biographies about musicians and people don't never talk about the actual importance of music or their instruments are to the musicians, but it was impossible to write about Eddie Van Halen and not write about how important the guitar was for him. In fact, it's through that matrix that essentially he saw the rest of the world. Chris and I are both guitar players. So in many ways, we all spoke the same language, so it made it much easier and made it easy for him to relate to us and vice versa.
When did these interviews take place, gentlemen? What was the window?
A long period of time. For me, it started in 1994, November of 1994. I think it was November 29th, 1994, I believe was my first date, Balance interview for the Balance album, that is. And then pretty much continued on and off from then on. Pretty much I took over at Guitar World writing about Eddie since about 2005 onwards. So it was kind of a big chunk of time, a little bit broken up here and there, but also just, a huge fan of Eddie from day one. I heard, not to mention the competing radio station, but KMET, I heard him, Van Halen, You Really Got Me in January of 78, just about a month before the album came out.
I used to listen to them too, so it's okay.
Okay, cool.
I think I was still in college trying to understand this radio thing, and I just gotten that bolt of lightning. It's like, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
Cool.
The book is, if you're a guitar nerd, you're going to love this. And I mean this by saying that, it's like you go into, how Eddie just would destroy a guitar essentially, and create his own, and what he would use, the strings, the different necks. I mean, if you, like I said, if you love guitar, you're going to love this book. If you don't love guitar, you're still going to love the book, because it just goes so far into Eddie, and you understand why he was the way he was.
Yeah, for me, that was the important idea, motivation for writing the book, is because I had read other things done on Ed, and they capture little bits and pieces of him, and maybe at different parts of his career. But as a human being, he was a complex guy, and there was a lot of evolution going on in his life from the time that he was, a child. To his death, and throughout his career, he was a number of different people. And so the important part of the book was for us to show this evolution, so you could understand and appreciate, how creative he was, and sort of, part of the difficulties in life are partly what also make us creative and drive the creativity. And so it was important for us to not just paint, sort of a Pollyanna portrait of Ed, but to really show the different emotional things that he went through in order to become the great musician that he became.
And it was a challenge for us too, because we are guitar nerds, and we do speak to those people, and it was we had to kind of pull it back a little bit. Like, there's a lot of exciting stuff we discovered doing the research after the fact. In fact, it turned into another entire article for Guitar World about the origin of the Frankenstein guitar, but it was just a little bit too nuts and bolts for the average audience out there. So the idea was for us to appeal to a large audience, make it, have enough good stuff for the guitar nerds out there, but at the same time, exciting and understandable. And again, the instrument is such a big part of who Eddie was, that you can't really ignore it. I mean, unfortunately, there are books out there that have ignored, they've ignored the Frankenstein guitar completely. And it's like, how can you do that? Because that's just such a big part of his personality. I can just speak. I mean, it's like the black and white here, the black and white guitar on the cover. That just spoke volumes to me as a kid. It was just like, that was just the coolest thing. And that was such a part of his identity. And then, of course, when he painted it red, that became even a bigger part of his identity.
Yeah. I think one of the things I really enjoyed is that in between some of the chapters, you have conversations with, and there's Steve Vai, there's Michael Anthony, there's Eddie and Wolfgang. And I think it's somewhere with Michael that he talks about Eddie tinkering with putting guitars together, and Eddie's going to Michael and saying, wait till you hear what I put together. And I'm not, I took 3 years of guitar. I can't play a lick to my name. But my question to you guys, since you do play guitar, can you say this is what it's going to sound like? And I mean, to me, it's like Eddie putting that together and saying, wait till you hear it before he even knows what it sounds like. To me, that's amazing. And I don't know if that's true, but you guys might be able to answer that better than I can.
Well, there is you have an idea of where you're going with things. I think there is something to speak to that. I mean, I can speak from a different project. I just did put together a guitar that was based on a custom guitar that Elliot Easton and the Cars had built in like late 70s that he used on the Panorama album, and he used on those tours, and also Shake It Up. And I just knew, it's like, yeah, this is going to sound cool. This is going to sound a lot like Elliot because I'm putting the right parts together. And I think Ed, he was searching. And I think with that, again, with the Frankenstein, I mean, there's this whole debate about when did the tapping come about? And it's actually very fascinating because it wasn't too long before they recorded. I mean, it was actually after the demos where he really finessed it and turned it into this wonderful showpiece. But before then, it was just kind of something he was working out, and he didn't really have the right guitars. It wasn't until he got this neck that he put on there that was wider and flatter that he was really able to do those virtuosic type of things with much more ease, and just he could flow that much better. So I think that's part of what he was talking about. It's just like, I'm going to be able to play the stuff that I'm hearing now that much easier. In our interview, you mentioned that we do speak with other people in the book, including, fellow guitar players like Steve Vai, Tony Iommi,
Steve
manager
Lukather.
Ray Daniels. And Steve said something really interesting. He said, you don't stumble. If you're a great guitar player, you don't stumble upon the sound that you want. You think of it first in your brain and then pursue it. And that's sort of the extraordinary thing about Ed, was that he had a sound in his head that he couldn't purchase at a store. He had no other choice other than to build this thing and also mess around with his amp to get a sound that he wanted. And this is really quite extraordinary. It's a little bit more common these days, but it's almost as if Beethoven was like, or saying like, look, I need to have a piano that sounds a certain way, and I'm going to build the piano. Or Miles Davis said like, oh man, this trumpet isn't doing it for me. I'm going to go learn how to make a trumpet to get what I want. You know, like people say, oh, he made his own guitar to create these sounds, as if that wasn't a big deal. But hey, that was brand new at the time. And Ed was the guy that really started that trend.
And it shows later on too, when he's doing the Wolfgang, and it's a third iteration of his signature guitar, and they spend 9 months working on the pickups. I mean, that's just how crazy it was. It was just like, there's it's not in the book, but Chip Ellis, the guy who worked on the project with him, had kept a diary. And it's just like, it's almost like Groundhog Day when you reach the point where they're working on pickups. Like, we got a new set of pickups and took them to Ed. Ed plugged it in, doesn't sound right. Doesn't hit me here. Doesn't do this, back to the drawing board. They went through 2 different companies. They finally brought it in-house, and they did the first set that they did in-house, actually got it right. It was the most bizarre thing, but it was like after 9 months. I mean, that's unheard of. That's just unheard of in this day and age. It's most people just like, put out a product. I want to start getting the checks in. And Ed was like, no, it doesn't sound good enough. It's got to sound right, So it's amazing. He knew what he heard, and he just, he pursued it in any way he could.
I mean, we might be guitar nerds, but Ed was the ultimate guitar nerd.
I'm not putting you that high on the pedestal, but I'm putting you way higher than I am.
Well, you haven't heard them
that's
play.
True.
You haven't heard them play, so they got all the equipment back there. I can tell they're serious about what they do. One thing in the book that you really point out, and you make it really well known, and it's one of those things in Van Halen lore that I don't think people think about, but just how good the songwriting was.
Yeah.
And Ed did all the music. I mean, it's like those hooks, that first album, it was like, my God, side one, Van Halen 1, you hear that, and it's like perfection.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to me that he had that ability to write like that.
Well, one of my favorite Van Halen songs is, it's sort of funny. It's not necessarily Ed's greatest guitar showcase. It's Somebody Get Me a Doctor. I love that song, but it's just a great song. It kills me every time I listen to it. And as you mentioned, the other thing that people don't realize is that they're one of the few bands to have 2 diamond records. So in other words, over 10 times platinum. And you don't get that from just being a good guitar player. You get that from writing brilliant songs that people love.
The 10-time was that the first one in 1984? Or
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Both of those are diamond records.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, even with the Eagles, their records are the ones that are diamond records are the greatest hits records.
I know.
And Hotel California, but yeah, it's like one studio record and 2 greatest hits packages, whereas you have 2 bona fide studio albums from Van Halen that are in that echelon.
God.
And they had everything that went with it. The look. It's like you had that dynamic front man, David Lee Roth, and singing his shit. And
he was a carny.
What he was doing, and he was
really.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a great way of putting it. He was a carny.
Like a barker.
He did all that stuff. And then Alex was just so tremendous on the drums. And then Michael's harmonies. People forget about how great those harmonies were on those songs too.
Oh yeah, yeah. They were the whole package. I mean, that was the thing. It's like when I heard You Really Got Me, on the radio, it was just like, okay. There's just this whole sound there. I mean, it's just what really got me about Van Halen. Yes, there's this incredible guitar playing, and I was really into that as a kid, learning to play guitar, but it was the whole sound. I mean, it was just these big power chords, these vocals that just sounded incredible. The drums were huge. I mean, the only thing I can say is that the bass just wasn't quite there, but they had to make all that space for Ed's guitar. So, and that's what's kind of a drag when you listen to the demos that they did for Warner Brothers, when you can hear Michael Anthony's bass playing and how great it was. And it's like, oh my gosh, but they just, they just wanted to showcase Ed so much that they just had to carve out a little bit extra frequency for him instead. But again, that was part of the sound. It was just this huge sounding guitar.
I mean, they're one of the few bands that you really know the names of every person.
Yeah.
You know, when you know who the bass player is, then you know you really have something.
True.
That is very true. Yeah, I found it interesting that I didn't realize this, that kind of near the end of Michael leaving, that he was only 20% kind of ownership in the band, and I think it was David Lee Roth or something, or David and the band, that came to him and said, you know, we kind of want to knock you out of credits for writing and stuff. And, you know, it was kind of sad to see such a good guy kind of getting shoved out of there.
It really was that's the sad part of the story. And I think that was just really what they how they started out, just as these great young guys from California. And they were just like, you know, the great success story.
One for all.
Yeah. All for one for all. And you really felt that. I remember, because I went to every tour. I saw every single Van Halen tour. And I can remember those early days. And they were just like, you know, they were like the Four Musketeers, you know, up there. There was just such camaraderie. Yeah. And you did see that start to fall apart around, you know, the 1984 tour. And everybody has their extended solo showcase. And it was just like, gosh, when is the band going to actually play a song here? You know, it just was like someone's leaving the stage. And then here's Ed doing his thing, you know, and then here's
it was
Dave
almost like that they
rap.
couldn't stand being on the same stage together.
Yeah, they really got that way. But it was sad to find out later after the fact that, yeah, Michael was the one who was just, you know, getting squeezed out of the deal. But he was such a great, nice guy that it didn't bother him. Like most people would just create such tension and everything. And Michael was just like, oh, well, hey, I'm still doing good. So what the heck, you know?
Well, we did talk to Mike about that in the book. And, you know, that was sort of the interesting thing, is he didn't try to skirt the issue. And even after all these years, he still seemed somewhat confused by it. But, you know, that's how it is a lot of times in bands or just groups of people. There's always somebody that's a little bit of the scapegoat. And, you know, it wasn't going to be the brothers.
Yeah.
And it wasn't going to be David Lee Roth, you know, who was larger than life. And I just think when they didn't know where to point the finger, the easiest thing it was to do was just basically point at Mike. And that was sort of Mike's summary of the situation. He goes, you know, I was the whipping boy, but to this day, I don't really understand why.
I think you pointed out in the book too that it was actually, I think during the 1984 tour or right after that, they said, okay, because it used to be 25% everybody,
right?
And then I think somewhere around that tour, that's when I did not know that they initially cut him out of like merchandising and stuff at that time, and then I know it was like, I think before the Balance tour maybe, that they were just like, you're a hired hand, that's what you are now.
Yeah, that's true.
It's funny, you know, I mean, you'll see this in the book, where Ed, in general, harbored like a little bit of bitterness in terms of the creative load that he had to carry on his shoulders. You know, whether it's true or not, you know, Ed felt like he was doing a lot of the work and these other guys were just kind of piling on towards the end of it. Not his brother, of course, the other guys. And so you do get some sense of that, and it's building. The more and more Ed's expected to deliver, and the more pressure on him, he starts to question, well, is this really a situation where everybody should get a quarter? And, you know, hey, it's all easy for us to say, oh, Mike's such a good guy, you know, but if you're in that situation and you're the guy holding the weight of the world on your shoulders, and this other person's getting the same amount as you are, you know, you might have the right to question that, you know. And I think in the case of Mike, this is just me personally saying it, you know, he had a pretty good ride.
Yeah, no, he did. And he doesn't
and then
deny
maybe
that,
at some point, you know, maybe he shouldn't have gotten 25%. I don't know. That wasn't up to me, but I also understand Ed's point of view to some degree.
Well, you have to look at the time too, because that's when Ed, you know, he put all this money into building a studio at his home, you know, so he builds this building and he puts all this equipment in, and then he's up there 24/7, creating, and the other guys are just popping in from time to time and everything. And I think that's when Ed started to say like, hey, why are they getting as much as I am? I'm the one who's investing literally money and time into this project, and that's probably what motivated a lot of that, was Ed just kind of feeling like, hey, I deserve a bigger share here,
But Ed was like a studio rat, man.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
He lived there. I mean, the studio was actually in back of the house. Now, you guys have actually been in that studio. What's it like, 5150?
Oh, it's guitar nerd heaven, basically. First of all, I mean,
a lot of parts.
Disneyland.
I mean, first of all, there's all these historical instruments that you've seen on tours, and in various photo sessions and whatever. So there's all that stuff around there. So that's already magical. Then you see all the recordings on the walls. And there's one section there where he keeps all his backups, all his tapes, the master tapes, the mix downs on CDs and cassettes and you name it. So there's that. That's, and then of course there's like Alex's drums. In the latter days, you had, Wolfgang's bass setup in there. It felt like a clubhouse. It didn't really feel like a studio. It had this kind of rough around the edges type of feel. It was dirty. There was like trash on the floor and guitar picks all over the place and cables running everywhere.
Well, I always say it was sort of an extension of Ed's bedroom from where he grew up, and he used to go to his bedroom and practice, 10 hours a day. 5150 is sort of like an expanded version of his bedroom, if you will, with all that implies of a teenage boy's bedroom, I guess. The other thing is, not only were the guitars there, but if you're a huge fan of Van Halen, he had this, what we call the Magic Marshall amp. He had this amp that he used on the first 3 or 4 records, and continued to use actually 6 records. And that forget about the Frankenstein guitar. This amp is almost taken on sort of a mythic element. And you walk in there and there's the amp, it's like, light coming down.
Where is the Frankenstein guitar?
It's in storage under lock and key in a vault.
So the Van Halen family still owns it. It's not in a Hard Rock or Smithsonian or something.
No, it's the number one, the genuine, the Frankenstein, and a couple of the other key instruments, the Shark guitar. There's one of these black and white guitars that he did on the Fair Warning tour. A few of these things, they're all very safely kept in that, in high security area, so, but most of the good stuff's still with the family.
That's good. Yeah.
I like one of the things that you guys highlighted in the book also is every once in a while in between the chapters, you'd pick out one of his guitars that he heavily used and you'd actually show a picture of it and then give a little write-up on it, which was really nice. It was like, this was used on this album, and gave a little detail again back for the guitar nerds.
It was the prize in the Cracker Jack box, so to speak.
That was, I did a cover story with them for Guitar Aficionado, and we went through about 50 guitars up there at 5150. It was like an all day, like a double 2-day kind of ordeal. Not even ordeal, it was like a amazing experience. But the thing that was so fascinating about that was like, when you talk to Ed, sometimes you couldn't get a straight answer out of him, but when you had him tell the story through the guitar, that revealed a lot. And I like some of these things were stuff that were left over from the article because we just couldn't run all of them. There was just too much. So I felt there were some really good stories in here. And a lot of it just gave some insight. There was like the one guitar that he used for learning to see, where it was like a Telecaster he couldn't get in tune. He took it outside and threw it in the air. And then he decided that I'm going to just take these clamps and clamp 3 different guitars to these stools and tune each one differently to this open chord and use that to play the chords instead. It's like, who does that? Only Eddie Van Halen would think of something like that.
Wow.
And I thought that's something that doesn't fit in with the narrative that we were doing, but to just bring that out and kind of call attention to that, just again, it's a glimpse at the madman genius of this guy.
Yeah, what's interesting about Ed's guitar collection, and he had over 100 guitars.
Oh, yeah.
Was that
400, 500?
Yeah, was that it wasn't the traditional kind of collection, where guys go out and they find some rare Stratocaster that's worth $1 zillion or whatever. if anything, it's just a bunch of mutts, just weird things that Ed was interested in, that he thought he could make it an interesting sound with. Chris even tells a story where he was given a 335 guitar as a gift from B.B. King. And we're looking at it, and the pickups are like ripped out of it and stuff. Like, for him, guitars were living, breathing, evolutionary things, no matter where they came from. So there was none of this, I have to have this sacred, ancient Les Paul or something like that. These were just tools.
And that's the funny thing is that, because a lot of people knew that he had bought, about late 79, early 1980, he had gone to Norm's Rare Guitars there in the Valley, and he bought a couple, late 50s Les Pauls, and he bought a Flying V later on. And he used the Flying V very famously in the 1984 album and a few other tracks after that. But he just sold them. He just reached a point where someone offered him a bunch of money for them. And they were like the most valuable from a collector's standpoint, from a vintage guitar guy kind of standpoint. And Ed was just like, I can get those sounds from other things. So I don't need them anymore. He just, and that's the thing he said, even about that BB King Lucille guitar. It's just like, I'm not sentimental, it's so weird to see. It's like, it's signed like, to Ed, BB King, and then it's like, it's all in parts, most people would have that hanging on the wall,
right?
Have it framed.
Right.
Wow.
But I don't think he meant any disrespect by it. I don't want to paint that picture.
Yeah.
And it wasn't any disrespect. In fact, if anything, it was a sign of respect that he took it apart and used the parts for something else, because it's like, I like your guitar. I like the bridge on that. I like the pickup, I'm going to put it on this.
Yeah.
Just a creative genius. Let's go through like some of the albums, or like talk about some of them, like Van Halen 1. We were talking about that. Van Halen 2, another awesome one. Third album, Women and Children First. I loved that record. Fourth one, Fair Warning, which was different and deeper. And then Diver Down. And Diver Down was I think a lot of people were just kind of shaking their head. I mean, it was a really good record, but it had too many cover versions. It had some great stuff like little guitars and, some other stuff on it that was just phenomenal. But it was like, you could tell that there was a separation in the band at that time.
It was a catalyst. It was a catalyst for Ed to do, his own studio. I mean, that's the thing. It's, I think with Fair Warning, I mean, most guitar players, most guitar nerds, Fair Warning is the album. People love that because that's Ed, he's breaking out finally. He's embracing the studio for the first time in his career. Before that, he used to go in and just like record like a live thing, be done in less than a week. With Fair Warning, Ed's in there and he's doing overdubs and he's experimenting with all these sounds and he's locking himself up in the studio, and people are, in the band, like Anthony and even Alex were like, what the heck? The song sounds completely different than when we left last night, but Ed embraced that. And then of course, Diver Down, they go back to the same old, and it's even worse because they really had to rush that album out. Ed didn't even have time to write new music for it or just even feel like sharing any of his new music because he always had new songs. But I think that's when he decided. It was around that time that, he was hanging out with Alan Holdsworth, and he'd done a gig with him at the Roxy. He met Steve Vai backstage. Steve invites him up to meet Frank Zappa. They go to Zappa's house. They see Zappa's home studio, and they say like, do you think we could do that? Him and his engineer, Don Landy, they're both like, hey, I think we could build a studio at your house, Ed. You got that space up there,
And then they could control the situation where they didn't feel like they had the control over it before. I mean, I don't think Diver Down was necessarily, the album it was because of fights within the band. It was more of a time situation. They had recorded Pretty Woman that became an unexpected hit. And then the record company's like, well, there's got to be a record that goes around the rest of this, like make something quick. And it was a product of having to make a fast record to sort of go with that single. But even so, Ed just never wanted to find himself in that position again. And that did change the trajectory of Van Halen.
And the amazing thing is, I mean, it led to 1984. I mean, that's what's really so incredible. It's like, I mean, really, it's their masterpiece. I mean, it's just that again, you talk about like the first album not having a single bit of filler on it. Same thing with 1984. Every single song on that could be a single and should have been a single. It's like a beginning to end, nearly perfect record. And it's just, if I think Ed just really wanted to show not only his band, but the world what he could do. I think he was just so highly motivated from that. And I think that was, again, he really embraced the studio and embraced this whole creative concept. He, again, going beyond just being the guitar hero, being beyond the guy who won Guitar Player Magazine's, Gallery of the Greats, or whatever. He wanted to show that, hey, I can play keyboards too, even though there were some keyboards earlier on, the records before that. Mm-hmm. But he really just embraced that. It's just like, look, I can do this. I can do a wider variety of type of music. Why should we do a cover version of a song when I can write a song that's as good as those covers?
Didn't a lot of those covers come from David? Like, didn't he just bring in a whole...
Definitely.
Well, David and their producer, Ted Templeman. Ted was the one sort of pushing them to do Dancing in the Street and, I think part of the idea of doing... They've always did cover songs, but the reason they were doing so many was, again, this Diver Down was created in such a short period of time, and they just didn't have the material, so they had to go and reach for the cover songs. I like Diver Down, by the way. I think that there's some great stuff on it.
I agree too. But and in their cover of the Kinks, Where Have All the Good Times Gone? That was great. I love that too. And
a lot of other people like Diver Down too. I mean, there are records I don't really care for in the Van Halen catalog, but I find, the pleasures are, there's a lot of pleasure in the spontaneity of Diver Down, even though Ed wasn't a big fan of it.
I was going to say that 1984, I think, was basically the last time that Ted Templeman produced. And that was all because of I think, friction with Ted's direction and where Eddie's direction wanted to be. They brought in Sammy, got that up, but they still brought Ted like 2 or 3 albums
for Unlawful
later
Carnal Knowledge,
to come back, which really surprised me.
Well, they were having some issues with their producer, Andy Johns. And the issues was they were having too much fun in the studio.
Can't have that, man.
Andy by that time was, had drinking issues.
He's British.
And he hung around Led Zeppelin,
and he had 3 or 4 good hours in him. And then after that, it ended up sort of going every which way. And those guys just going into the studio and goofing around. And I think at some point the record label said, guys, it's been a year. We got to get you out of there, So they had to bring the hammer down and brought in Ted to help them finish up on that record.
Ted made sense, though, because he produced the first Montrose album, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So it was like there was that Sammy connection, and it was like that first Montrose album was just so awesome.
It's a great record.
Yeah, Bad Motor Scooter and stuff like that.
It's break time.
Time for a quick break.
There you go.
This break brought to us by CW?
By me.
Okay.
And all of our Patreon fans. First, I want to say thanks, everyone, for listening. We love doing the podcast. It's our way of reaching out to all of our rock and roll fans. We've got no sponsors, just dedicated fans like you. And if you can spare as little as $1 a month, please go to patreon.com or our support tab on our website. That's rockandrollconfessional.rocks, and help us out, please. We are grateful for all of you that have already taken the initiative to do so.
We appreciate you.
Yes, we do. All right, Rita Wild. Got a trivia question for everybody?
Hey, see if you can get this one. What was the original title of Van Halen's OU812 album? The answer at the end of the second half. So here we go with the second half of our interview with Brad Tolinski and Chris Gill. Between you guys, who do you like better? Or do you say, which era of Van Halen? Do you like the David Lee Roth years? Do you like the Sammy years? Do you like the Gary Cherone years? What do you like?
Year.
Well, I prefer the David Lee Roth era for a few different reasons. I mean, one of the great things about Van Halen, and people forget because as time passes, you don't have the context. But when Van Halen was first arrived in, their first record came out 77, 78, rock music had sort of gone in this direction where it was getting more and more and more about the production, you had records like Boston and you had records by Journey, and they all emphasize this sort of almost a perfection about them. And then you get Van Halen 1, which is, it's an explosion of like punky chaos almost, I mean, it's brilliant as to how sort of loose-limbed and funky and fun it is. And, I love that about Van Halen, especially during the David Lee Roth era, is the sort of how on edge they were, how unpredictable, how, just fun. I was talking about everybody, beautiful girls. I mean, it sort of slows down, speeds up. It's sort of all over the place, I mean, it's, but in a great way, like the Stones live or something like that, or the Who. When Sammy comes along, they go into a different direction, which is, I'm not going to knock it. It's just a much more polished studio, radio-friendly direction, radio-ready direction. And so I miss that on the Sammy records, and I think that's why I tend to like the David Lee Roth era better.
How about you, Chris?
It's like your first time, it's like, I'm so nostalgic about the David Lee Roth days and everything like that. I like them both. I mean, they have their strong points. There's some really great stuff in Ed's songwriting in the Sammy Hagar years, but I do agree. I like the danger of the early stuff. I like the rawness. Again, the first album, it always stands out to me because it's just one of those things that every time I listen to it, it just takes me back to that very first time that I hered the album, especially when I hear Eruption. It still sounds big and amazing and brutal and violent, and just, I haven't really heard a guitar solo piece that's come since that's knocked me out the same way. There's just everything's so practiced. And again, it's on the edge. It's like you're watching some guy in a race or something like that, and you think he's going to crash, and somehow he just goes around that crazy curve, or whatever, and pulls it off, maybe gets a little bit out of control or whatever. But
that's not a sign of bad musicianship, by the way.
No, it's just a
sign of great musicianship.
Yeah.
That you could keep things fresh and energetic and dangerous. And, it's not so vacuum sealed and perfect. If you can, as a band, you can accomplish something like that, make something feel fresh and alive and exciting for people, then you're doing your job as a musician.
And what's so fascinating about that first Van Halen album to me too is that, they spent a lot of that time in between when they did the demos in April of 77 to when they recorded the album in late August of 77. They went to the Whiskey a lot and they saw these punk bands and they pulled inspiration from that, and it was, they still were a hard rock band, but they latched onto that energy because you can hear a big difference in demos and then what they actually put on the album. And of course, the new material they wrote, like Ain't Talking About Love and Atomic Punk, those both came from that little downtime in between. And I'm kind of like, thank God they had that period because it just like, they really got this aggression. And it was weird because it was a punk aggression. It wasn't a heavy metal aggression. And it's like, that's one thing that's so great about them is this yin and yang. They're kind of bright and poppy. Like they're not really like Judas Priest and Dark Leather or Black Sabbath or something like that. Almost like you saw their stage attire was actually very colorful, and everything and very California. And it's kind of Eddie's smiling, and they really appealed to the female element as well as the male element. And I think that's just one of the brilliant things about them. But they also they harnessed into this punk energy, yet came out with this fury of heavy metal, and I think it's one of those things. It's just a great time capsule. And again, the Sammy stuff was great for its time. It's very great for the late 80s. And it's a great example of that era. It's so polished and almost like, we had the click track going on and Alex was holding back a little bit. He wasn't swinging as much. There wasn't as much of that jazz swing and everything going on. But it was great. It was like, we're super talented and we're going to show you how talented we are now.
I wonder if it was the ego of David Lee Roth that kind of sent everybody over the edge. I mean, at that point, I it's like CW had mentioned that he was kind of like a carnival barker. That's what he had become. And it's like that kind of took away from the band, I thought. And then, things happen. And then when Sammy joined, I love the fact that Sammy was more I can't say that he was a better songwriter or better lyrics than David, because some of David's lyrics are just phenomenal.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But the experimentation, like right now, playing that piano, it was like you never would have heard that in Van Halen with David Lee Roth.
And that's the thing. I think that Ed was progressing too. And that's why we saw even what happened with Gary Sharon, that Ed had progressed even further, that he wanted to get away from, I mean, I know that the song Amsterdam, he personally told me that, you know, he was just fed up with Sammy when he did the lyrics for Amsterdam. It's like, gosh, it's like all the places he could have picked, you know, it's like, this is where my brother and I are from, and we don't smoke pot, you know, and he's just kind of painting it as this party place or whatever. And he was kind of offended by it. And I think Ed really wanted to grow. I mean, he talks so often about the last record he bought was Peter Gabriel's So, but I think he saw that as a benchmark. That's kind of the artist that he wanted to become. And that's where I think he felt he could go with Gary Sharon. And unfortunately, the audience didn't want to grow with him, you know, and I think that's what we see. You know, he managed to grow with Sammy Hagar and the fans followed along. But then when he went for a third time to do that, they're like, we're not along for the ride anymore. And it also doesn't help with it. Just, you know, and it wasn't really, again, Ray Daniels gets demonized so much. And it was kind of really cool in the book to actually have him be able to give his
Ray
side
Daniels
of the story.
was their third manager.
Yeah.
He was also the manager of Rush. And, you know, I thought he brought Gary in, and that wasn't the case.
That wasn't the case. And what's fascinating, though, is just like the poor guy had to manage the band during this time when it's just like no matter who was going to follow, it was bound to fail because they got everyone's hopes up by getting David back in the band for these two songs on that first Best Of compilation. And it's like no matter who's going to take the next position, they were just destined to fail because everybody was so primed to see Dave back in the band again. And then it's like, nope, we're not going to go back to the old days. We're going to go in this direction now. And again, they isolate. I mean, they alienated so many people when they did that. And it's like, I mean, the poor Ray, you know, like, it's like, how do I make sense of this? You know, what do I explain to people?
I heard rumors or talk that they were like even auditioning some female vocalists at the time, like Sass Jordan. Does that make sense?
Patti Smith.
Patty Smith or Patty Smythe?
Yeah.
Patty Smythe,
Patty Smythe,
yeah.
Yeah,
That was interesting.
Ed was always searching, you know, he was really looking to grow. And that's, I think, the thing that really frustrated him. And, you know, that's one thing that came up later in our interviews with them. And again, even in just talking about the guitars in some of those little episodes, is just that he really thought that Van Halen 3 was like a big, you know, period of growth for him. And like, just like my finest work, my finest guitar playing, you know, this is really advanced stuff I'm doing here. My songwriting is much more sophisticated. And that just wasn't what people wanted. And it really tore him up.
You both talk about how that record that you really liked it, you know, being from the programming side or on air side at KLOS, it was like, there's nothing really we can play.
Yeah.
You know, it was like from that standpoint, it's like, okay, so maybe it's got to be one of those organic albums that the audience loves, and then they start playing it live, but it never caught on. And I think, and then, you know, confirmed, I think, by your book, is that was kind of like, that was just like falling off the cliff for Eddie.
That was a dark time for Ed. It started out good because he was trying to get sober. You know, it's no secret that he had, you know, drinking problems, substance abuse. And around the time of 3, he was trying to get sober and get himself sort of straightened out. And he was in therapy and all these different things. And he had high hopes for the 3rd edition of Van Halen 3 with Gary Sharon. He thought this was going to be the next step in his evolution. And it was the closest thing to Ed ever had over complete control over a record. The producer was functioning more as an engineer, and Ed was functioning more as the producer on that record. And Ed was playing not only the guitar parts, but on several of the songs, playing the bass and even playing the drums on a couple of tracks. And Ed thought, wow, this is it. This is, you know, my highest personal expression. And when the record failed, it sent him sort of spiraling down, but there were other events happening in his life too that contributed to that. He was having health issues. This is when his problems with cancer were emerging. He fell off the wagon. And I think that's right when Valerie Bertinelli sort of said, his wife said, I've had enough. So there was this period after Van Halen 3 where Ed was coping with his first musical failure of something that he'd personally invested in. He was having problems with his marriage. He was having health problems. He was having sobriety problems. So people might wonder, well, what happened to Ed then? Why did he disappear? Or, there were pictures that emerged from that period where he was not looking his best. And unfortunately in the media, they tend to look at that and sort of mock him, oh, look at this, washed up rock star or whatever. But he was undergoing incredible personal problems. And, we wanted people to understand what was going on. And that became also an important part of this book. But the good news, I suppose, out of all of this is when he emerged, he was probably in the best mental state that he'd ever been in the last 4 or 5 years of his life. He had gotten sober for the most part, still was struggling a little bit, but he was much more clear. The health scares that he had made him sort of look back and think and appreciate all of the efforts that his former band members, put into Van Halen. I think he looked back with a, once, dealing with his mortality, he reflected back and really saw how much these people had contributed. And he gets to play with his son, which was so important to him. So, Ed went through a dark period, but I guess, for the fans out there, if they want to feel any comfort, he was in such a great place towards the end.
You guys could have written this book with him. I think, wasn't there talk actually of when he was still alive releasing this book? Is that true? Or Chris had approached Ed a couple of times, and Ed always sort of demure, like the idea of writing a book just did not appeal to him.
Yeah.
It's not about, it's not a guitar, man. It's a book.
Yeah. It was weird because it's like, I now realize, because there's another writer who I guess he'd done a book project with. And now that we know some about what actually happened with that, we can now see why maybe Ed balked about that, because it was kind of a disastrous experience for him. So I can understand that now in retrospect. But yeah, the idea was for us to, if at least not to do this with Ed, to do it with his complete and utter blessing. And we pretty much had that already, because we had a very tight working relationship with Ed that was unusual. A lot of times you do the interview with somebody and that's it. That's the last you hear of the person, and you write the story up and it goes out to the greater world and whatever. And then you either, if you're lucky, you may hear that they liked it. If you're not lucky, they may tell you that they didn't like it. Fortunately, that hasn't happened very often in my career, but that's usually the end of it. Well, with Ed, it was just kind of like you do the interview and that's just the beginning of the work, and then you'd go back and forth on stuff. And it wasn't like he was a control freak or anything like that. It was just really like he was just involved and he cared about the audience, and he wanted to make sure that things that he said were clear to people and that people could understand what he was talking about. And that's what we're kind of hoping to do a little bit of that process with this book too. It's just like, okay, Ed, or be able to go back and say like, hey, during this period, we don't know what was going on around this subject here. Can you fill us in a little bit more about that? Fill in some of the holes. Unfortunately, now we don't have that, but that's why we did a lot of the conversations with the other people who did know Ed during those periods in time, that they could fill in a little bit. The Lukather story about Beat It, that's the craziest thing, because like Ed never really did an in-depth interview about playing on Beat It. And for Lukather to talk about like, well, gee, it wasn't like Michael on one side and Quincy on the other. No, it's like they handed over the tapes to Ed. He took it to Sunset Sound with Don Landy, and then he goes like, "Hey, let's cut the tape up. I don't like this part. I can play better over this." Not realizing that there's time code on that all a whole other 24-track tape is synced to, and he just ruined it. Basically. And I'm sorry, like when Ed said that, Quincy was there's no way Quincy was letting him take a razor blade to the tape and cut it all up, when they had done all this work and and I that, but Michael's perfect vocals were on that particular tape, But that was just so great to get more detail about that, because that's something I don't even think Ed remembered, because I had read interviews with him like a couple of years later, and he seems to have forgotten. I mean, he mentions, oh yeah, we cut the tape up, but he doesn't mention that, yeah, you ruined it for everybody else. You know?
And they had to go back and record, right?
Yeah, they had to go back and record it all over again.
Yeah.
Like Lukather and Porcaro had to record the drums and, you know, the guitar parts and everything all over again.
Oh my God.
And he was getting phone calls from Quincy, and he wasn't really sure who Quincy was, so he wasn't answering them.
Yeah. He was hanging up on the guy.
And at the end, Ed basically went in and did the session and never got paid for it.
Yeah, and barely got. I mean, he got little credit right on the inner sleeve.
Want that. I don't think he
didn't want the credit.
Yeah,
he thought he thought that he was going to be able to just do this as for fun and nobody would ever really hear it. Like he didn't think, like, I'm going to do this guitar part on an R&B record. Nobody's ever going to know who this is, you know? And of course it turns out to be one of the biggest songs in the history of music.
But David discovered it, right?
Yeah.
Didn't he hear it somewhere and he heard the lick and said, that's got to be Eddie.
He was at a 7-Eleven down in West Hollywood, like off of Santa Monica Boulevard. And he said there was like some chola chicks hanging out, you know, with the pickup truck banging, you know, beat it and everything like that. And he's like going like, wait a second, that guitar sounds really familiar there, you know. But Ed had often said that he didn't get any credit for it, but it's there. I got a copy of the album. I looked at it and it's in the liner notes. It's buried in a billion other. I mean, there's like, you know, there's like 20 people on every song or whatever like that. But there's like, it says on Beat It, it says at the very end, like guitar solo, Eddie Van Halen. So he did get credit, but, you know, didn't get paid.
Did Lukather get credit?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Luke was on that whole record. I mean, he was one of the big session guys on Thriller.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just phenomenal guy, phenomenal guitarist, and just how sweet that those two became really good friends. And, you know, we talked with Steve a couple of months ago, and, you know, he just has such high reverence for Eddie.
Oh, yeah.
This book is really good. I would urge a lot of people to go check it out. Eruption. It is conversations with Eddie Van Halen, Brad Tolinski, and Chris Gill wrote this together. It really lets you see who Eddie was. I love the fact in the beginning, you talk about he's an immigrant, you know, from Holland.
Yeah.
And he doesn't speak the language. So he was bullied a lot in school. People make fun of him. And that kind of made him the person that he was, you know, to like keep on practicing, both he and Alex. But then the character arc, you know, he was just phenomenal. He was like a genius. He was like one of the greatest guitar players of all time. And then he goes on this slide that it's just like, I mean, people would send pictures of me down, you know, when he was at 7-Eleven, it was like, you know, looked like he pissed in his pants and stuff. Like he was looked like a homeless guy, you know, and then to recover from that and, you know, be happy, because that's the most important thing. And then see what Wolfie was doing, and then getting to hear Wolfie, you know, at least his song that he played him before. So I just think that's just great.
I'm glad that you got that, like the entirety of the story, because all too often in amongst Van Halen fans, in Van Halen aficionados, they'll dig into like one little area and say, oh, you know, the fight between Eddie and David and Sammy, and they'll all just, but, you know, these are just little events that make up a bigger, you know, this bigger picture. And we wanted somebody, when they read the book, to be able to look back at those little events and make sense of them. You know, that was really the important thing.
And that's who he was. I mean, you know, like when I first met him, he was the shyest guy. You know, it was like, who is this guy? It's like he was me, you know, in the mail form. He was like the shyest guy. I mean, nowhere near it, you know, creative and stuff like him, but modern day genius. And I think you guys did a terrific job with this.
He's one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century.
Yeah. And it's important for us, you know, we needed to get this book out there because it's, you know, things move on so quickly now in this day and age, you know, and we're constantly interrupted by this and that and some other trivial thing. And the thing was just, we need to remember Ed all the time. I mean, it's just, they talked like Wolfgang complained about the Grammys, about, the 30-second tribute that they did and how that wasn't enough. But it's like, yeah, but you got to grab the bull by the horns. You got to get out there and tell people. And this is us standing on the mountain shouting, hey, Eddie Van Halen was a great musician, people, pay attention to him, and that's what that's why we felt it was necessary to get this book out there, because it's just, the more the years pass, the more people are going to forget. And we want this to be out there and to stay and stand the test of time. And we felt that, there's never going to be an Eddie Van Halen autobiography. This is the closest thing you're going to get, because we talked with him a lot, and we talked with him a lot through various phases of his career. And especially there at the end, when, he just was so coherent and clear and very forthcoming. And he was a joy at the end. That's what I really miss, is just not having the opportunity to talk with him again, because those final interviews I did with him were really some of the best. I just felt he was very open and forthcoming, and, and just a great person. There wasn't this darkness that was there, in the 2000s, that there wasn't this cloud over him anymore. He felt, one of the crazy things like he talked about was like how he just accepted turning 60. And how he stopped dyeing his hair and he just let his hair go gray and everything like that. And, was working on his health, and it's so sad to see that, he had accepted it. And then all of a sudden the cancer came back, and it was just like, oh gosh, what a punch in the gut that was. But he didn't let it hold him back. He fought harder than ever. And we felt like he deserves a proper tribute, and didn't want to spread a bunch of salacious gossip. There's plenty of that out there if you want it, but we're honest about him. He did have flaws and he did have problems, but the heart of him was this genius, this person who was just incredibly creative, in songwriting, in playing, and even what he did for the instrument itself, what he did for the guitar. And we were the guys to tell it. So it's
people, ask us pretty regularly, what was the guy, like, and, and it was interesting. As opposed to sort of your typical rock stars with all the sort of bravado, he was sort of a vulnerable kind of guy that was always looking also for a personal connection. And, I had him, we would be talking about something about music or some sort of issue that he would have with the music. And he would shed real tears about those things. Like he really felt so strong and emotional about those things. And, so that's also part of what we wanted to get in there is, on a personal level, to capture that, vulnerability of that person as well.
You guys did a great job with it.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very, very much so.
We have a bonus round real quick, guys.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So now we're going to ask you personal things.
Yeah.
All right.
We're going to make it Eddie Van Halen based or Van Halen based. What is your favorite piece of Van Halen memorabilia
That you have?
Like, did you get a piece of that guitar from the BB King?
No, for me, it would have to be, there was a photo that was taken during my first interview with Ed, standing outside of 5150. And that to me is like my personal thing. Cause that's like, I finally got to meet, the guy who I was just, since I was a 15-year-old kid sitting there in the audience trying to figure out, with the binoculars, trying to figure out how he's playing this and what equipment he had in there. And now I'm at 5150 and I'm standing in the presence of the guy. I think that's what I value more than anything out of, having known him. Cause it's just, you can tell I've got a big shit-eating grin on my face in that photo and everything. And the craziest thing is that Ed, had completely drastically changed his appearance at that point, that he had cut his hair short, and he grew the goatee and everything. It was, during the Balance album. So he just went for a complete, 180 in his looks. And I remember when I first saw him, I didn't even recognize him, so it's kind of crazy that my picture with him was taken at that period. So that's mine.
Yeah. I guess my big takeaway is, being, when I was the editor-in-chief of Guitar World, one of the fabulous unbelievable benefits of being the editor-in-chief and talking with some of these people is that you got to actually play some of their historic instruments. Like I've played the Jimmy Page harmony guitar that he used on Stairway to Heaven. I played, Tony Iommi's SG that he played on the Second Sabbath record and some of these other things. And so, I mean, for me, just actually playing the Frankenstein through the Magic Marshall was enough of a takeaway for me. I didn't sound like Eddie Van Halen, by the way.
I was going to ask that.
So it's not just the instrument; it's the player.
Yeah.
Do you have a Spinal Tap moment of Van Halen that you saw or experienced or know about?
Oh, I definitely did. This was actually another crazy experience. It was at the Fender factory in Corona, California. And I was there to do an interview with Ed about the Wolfgang guitar, and they had a big Hollywood film crew set up and everything with the tracking and everything like that for the cameras and all this lighting and everything. But before that, they did like this segment with Ed walking around the factory, and it's a pretty big factory. And at some point we got separated, and I was literally saying, "Hello, Cleveland," and I'm like running into the janitor, and it's like, "Hey, how do I get back to like where the Gretsch thing is, where they have the camera crew set up and everything like that?" It's like, "Well, you take a little jog up this way," and it was literally that scene out of Spinal Tap. So I walked into like the finishing area and went through these curtains, and all of a sudden I'm in this other big room, and it's like, okay, how do I get back to where I was? And I can hear Ed walking down the other side, like, "Ed, where are you?" And he's like, "I'm over here,"
That's great.
I had a really funny experience. I went to go see Van Halen at a show, and I went backstage afterwards and was chatting with Ed, and we were like in the dressing room, and the other guys, the band were there, various other people, there were drinks and people hanging out and so on and so forth. And while I was talking to Ed, I noticed that he was sort of looking at me weird, like I couldn't put my finger on it, but he was like, and then he goes, "Brad, I gotta talk to you about something." And I'm like, go ahead, and he's like, I can't do it here. Not in front of all these people here. Follow me. So I go out of the dressing room, and we're back in the back of some enormous dome somewhere. And he's just follow me. So we're walking around in the back, and we go into the backstage men's bathroom. And it's just me and Ed in the men's bathroom. And he says, I got to tell you something. And I'm like, yeah, what's up? What's up? What's the problem, Ed? And he goes, you got to do something with your hair. You got to fluff it up. You got to, I don't know. This isn't working for you. So anyways, I just burst out laughing, but he was actually so sincere about it. He wasn't trying to make me feel bad or anything. It was like, bro to bro, I got to help you out here a little bit.
That's great.
Guys, congratulations on this book. And, for anybody that loves Van Halen or just is, just wants a great story, it's all in this book. You guys did a great job with it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having us on your great show.
Yeah, Thank you. It's a pleasure.
That was so much fun talking to these guys. I had a really good time, and I really enjoyed the book. And I have to say that part of the reason I enjoyed the book is because, like, at the beginning of each chapter, Brad and Chris kind of talk about what's coming up, and then it goes into the actual interviews. So it's kind of like an overall, and then they get into more of the detail with the actual written interviews. So it's really cool. Plus all the interviews with everybody else, like Michael Anthony and Lukather and things like that.
It's all good stuff. And if you're a guitar nerd, You will love it because it has all the specifications that Eddie would use and take out from guitars and mix and match together. And, they have some incredible stories in the book about, how Eddie would just take these guitars, didn't matter what kind of guitar it was, and just create something else out of it. They have the interesting story. I love the one about the B.B. King guitar. That was great.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's very cool. So thank you, Brad and Chris, for taking the time to talk with us. Also, special thanks to Michael Gerentano, who works at Hatchet Book Group, for taking the time to coordinate the interview.
You can purchase the book, Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, at hatchetbookgroup.com and support your local bookstore by purchasing from them, or you can get it through all the other usual
big fatty book people,
big box stores or Amazon or places like that. So
go to our website to find out some show notes. There you can find links to order the book, plus some great old and rare videos of Eddie Van Halen, along with lots more. You can find that at our website. It's rockandrollconfessional.rocks. And you can support us by going to our page on Facebook and sharing us with all of your friends. Also, the same thing goes for Instagram. Please share. We love it. And also, anything you can do to write a review. We love the reviews. Anywhere you listen, if it's Amazon, if it's Apple, please write a review, rate us, keep us going. We appreciate that so much. So, Reeds, how about that trivia?
Okay, the question was, what was the original name of Van Halen's OU812 album? And the answer would be, the working title was Bone. Yeah, it makes sense, but Alex hated that. Hager then decided on OU812 after seeing this on the side of a delivery truck on the freeway and finding it funny. Rumors, however, persist that the title was a disguised response to the title of David Lee Roth's 1986 solo album, Eat 'Em and Smile. And that's it for the show.
That's it, everybody. Thank you very much for listening. More good stuff coming up. We'll see you. We'll talk to you soon.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Take care. Goodbye.